Special meeting. I think I'd like to thank Mike for doing the agenda for today and being in touch about the urgency of this proposal, and then some other things we might want to discuss before our regular meeting, which, just a reminder, is on Wednesday, April 12th at 3:30. So I think we will just jump right in.
Yep.
And,
So I can kind of give a quick overview. Kevin's going to give a rundown on the proposal that we've got. So, you know, we've had a rough water quality year. Last summer was very, very warm, very dry, and then towards the end of the summer we got a big influx, a lot of rainfall coming in, and that continued all the way through the fall, right up until, you know, and even after Christmas. Around that time, we had a big rainstorm. We had a culvert failure on Lakeshore Drive, and it actually overtopped Lakeshore Road, and we had a lot of issues. So the phosphorus numbers going into the ice over months were very high, and you know, we're just concerned with where we're at right now. We want to be prepared in the event that we need to do something. We need to treat the lake. The last time, and all the correspondence that we've had with Dr. Ken Wagner has suggested the phosphorus issue we're having is not something that's internally being generated. It's external loading through the tributaries. And he's got a proposal here that Kevin will go over to study that and to recommend a treatment plan. So I don't know if you want to grab it from there. Or?
Yeah, thanks. Does everybody have a copy of the proposal? Okay, good. So yeah, like Mike said, Dr. Wagner has been working with us. He's been our expert. He's worked closely with Chris and Erica, and he's a limnologist. He does this throughout the region. He helped us on our copper sulfate treatment and get the permitting and get permission for that. He's helped us on the alum treatment. So he's been in discussion on and off. So with Erica, we reached out to him just to keep things going, because we're going to be, we don't want to do a treatment in the warm weather with what we experienced last time. Stratification, because of the temperatures of the lake, caused problems. We are concerned that we're near the end of our effective alum treatment from the last time. The discussions, like Mike said, you know, we believe this is constant loading of input on different storm events over the last 3 or 4 years. We did do a light dose last time, which was more of a water column stripping of phosphorus. We did not do a higher dose, which was a seeding of the sediment to be able to really bind it there. So the options that we were looking at, that we talked about with Dr. Wagner, were in-lake treatment or possibly at the tributaries, kind of a dosing station based on flow. To better understand that is why Dr. Wagner gave us this proposal. So really, there's 4 parts to it, and the big one is trying to understand the inputs. And CEI had done a model back in 2010. Then FB had used that information and did a model in results 2021. So Dr. Wagner is looking to use a lake loading response model based on some recent information FB used to be able to look at all of the tributary areas, which is direct drainage, some is the different types of uses, as well as, you know, what are the atmospheric conditions, all the current conditions, groundwater, land use, internally loading, plus with our water quality data that we've been gathering. So the result of that is going to be understanding the management scenarios, right? So, and be able to evaluate the watershed for sources. Like, we do know that we don't have a known failed septic system. We know we don't have any what's called point loads, right? Coming out of a pipe, coming off from a farm. It's from the watershed, and we're trying to understand that better with this proposal and this model. And then it would give the option to evaluate those type of treatment options. So why we're here today in front of you is that this is looking at the watershed. So we've tried to really, where does the Watershed Commission and where does the Utility Operations Fund things has been the question in the past. So we were trying to look at, if it's in the watershed, we're coming through this group, and then on-lake treatment, on-lake type events, we paid for that in the operations for Auburn Water and Lewiston Water. So that's why we're here today, to put this before you, to answer any questions, hopefully get some action on it, be able to move on this. I will say that the treatment options that we're looking at would be very specific. We would look, I think we would, based on our conversations with Dr. Wagner, we wouldn't look to do a major sediment seeding with alum again, or to do that. We didn't do it at all. We'd be looking at more of a localized dosing. So if the model showed, for example, there were a lot of inputs coming along the Spring Road at those tributaries, we could potentially dose in lake along there. Whereas we know we have inputs from what we're calling First Brook. We know we've got Townsend Brook, and then there's North Auburn from the basin. So if those are our major, then we could look at doing a dosing station at those major tributaries where it'd be effective. And basically it would be run off a rain gauge, a storm event, and then we would basically dose some of the alum as the flows are going through that area. So that's what this proposal is looking at and discussing with staff, and really have an idea. And our permit is still valid, so we want to update DEP and drinking water program, as well as all of our stakeholders. If we were to do either a dosing station or another treatment, we'd want to get that information out, have a stakeholder meeting, get everybody involved. IF&W was there last time, make sure we have all the concerns, we're following the permit. If it's a dosing station, we've got a little more logistics. Erica, I think, has reached out to Solitude or Mike, so we need to get them on board and make sure they're ready to deploy, they have product, if we're going to do an in-lake. And if not, we want to get, and we would look to Dr. Wagner to assist us with designing some dosing stations. So, and I don't think the dosing stations would be as temperature sensitive as a lake treatment.
I have a question about the timing, because I know the ideal thing is to get it designed and in before the water gets too warm, right?
For an in-lake treatment,
So,
I agree.
Like
Yep.
May, June,
Yeah, we hit July, 4th of July, and it's,
too late.
yeah, we've seen large algae counts. So now we're dealing with algae, and we've seen some threat stratification. So it depends on when ice is out. The colder, the better, but that's typically when it's a problem that we think.
So I had a couple questions on the proposal itself.
Yep.
I guess under number 2, are we sure that Dr. Wagner's group is going to be able to obtain the FBE version of the model?
Yes.
He's reached
Confirm
out.
that.
Yes,
He
that's
knows
confirmed.
those staff professionally, has worked with them before, and says
Okay.
it's a simple form to obtain that information.
Okay, great. And then I guess because you're doing a model and you have some of this data you have to input in, does he give you any indication of the level of confidence he'd have in the model results?
I think you'd want to see the data first,
Okay,
and we can definitely follow up with that.
okay, yeah.
I know he requested to see this model because he had worked with them before. He knew how they did this one, and he was very interested in that data because of that. So I feel like he has some confidence in that group and that what was done, and feels strongly that he can use that for what he needs to do.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think he's going to be very confident on it, but like a percentage.
You got to see it, right?
80% or 95%, but I think we wouldn't be going down this path if he wasn't highly confident on being
Yeah,
able
yeah.
to discern
Okay.
some alternatives.
Right, okay, great. I think one of the things that I know from just my previous work is that identifying the source of these things is critical. And I did appreciate the fact that he was suggesting they were gonna go parcel to parcel to look at that. I was wondering how are they gonna do that, like on foot? Because that seems like the majority of their costs are for watershed evaluation. I don't know what that means, but I was curious if you had any conversation with him about how they were gonna do the parcel to parcel evaluation of sources.
We discussed that. I'm trying to remember because it's been a couple weeks, but what there will be some boots on the ground, some analysis, but I think some of it will be looking at similar information as what CEI and FB have used, which is current GIS information, aerials, so whether it's Google or our own internal, and then actually look at those areas of concern and address those with actual inspections.
Okay.
But we can confirm amount of time boots on the ground. It's similar to what CEI had done. They actually did, this was after the algae bloom and the fish kill.
Mhm.
So they were looking at what septics were failed, if any. They were looking at, indicators downstream of those septics that were closest to the lake. We did a lot of boots on the ground, culvert inspections, all those type of things. So we won't be to that degree, but I think it would be prioritized based on the risk of, or likelihood of a loading on the parcel.
Yeah, I guess my concern is not so much the septic systems, it's the other types of sources. For instance, Blanchard Pond has been identified as one. But there seems to be a major source or sources coming through Townsend Brook over all these years. And so far, I have had no indication that we have identified what that's coming from. So, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, just a nebulous sort of, GIS, or I want them to actually try to identify the sources of this problem. Some of it seems to be sediment transport in these big, but why is there actually other sources? And if so, then we need to address those. So I would like to hear more from him
Sure.
what their approach will be to that, as well as, coming into the basin and other things like that, from the tributaries. So,
Something that might be helpful to that, and I hadn't thought of this, Kevin, when we met, but I do have a draft watershed management plan update from CDM Smith that they finished right around December last year when I was out. So I have that. I haven't read it yet, but
okay.
in that that might take care of some of the work that Ken is proposing. I'll want to double check, their watershed evaluation line, and then, the parcel by parcel. I did 2 field days with one of the staff members from CDM Smith, so some of it was, driving along. It wasn't actual, getting out and walking each parcel, but we did look at the entire watershed, at least either 5 foot or by vehicle. So I'd be interested to see what they say for potential sources. So I think we could use some of that information, and maybe then Ken and Ecological Instincts, who I think is his sub, who we mentioned in here, wouldn't have to take on quite such a large amount of work for that. So it could be a combination. But I agree, we want to know, we have a lot of water quality data from Townsend Brook and all the way upstream. And we know what's there for forested area or for golf course or this and that, but putting that piece together, see if there's something else that we can tackle rather than just at the end would make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Because just treating the end of the tributary, you can be doing that for 50, 100 years,
right,
unless we actually get to the source of the problems.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to be dominating. So just one more. So I was wondering what the role of our current scientific partners are in this process. For instance, the Bates and treatment plant personnel, et cetera, in terms of conversations about proposals and working along with people. Since the FB environmental report did suggest that we have a group that, which we do have a group, but are they involved at all in any of this type of oversight or review of things.
Absolutely. So we've been in kind of personnel flux, I'll say.
Yeah,
We've talked about doing another stakeholders meeting to be able to facilitate that. So we have Holly from Bates is over all the time and talks with Erica and Chris routinely. Mike and I have met with Chris when we talked with Dr. Wagner because Erica was out. So staff is sharing where we're at monthly on what we're seeing for trends. Mary Ann's included in that, and so we're bringing everybody together. The lab staff is usually involved in that because Dan Fortin has unbelievable history and institutional knowledge on what's going on. Like he's already said, when this area of the lake is open, it's 7 days, the whole lake's open. I mean, he has that type of institutional knowledge. So backing that up with the data that they're gathering, as well as storm response sampling. So we definitely value our partners, and not just Holly over at Bates, but also Lake Stewards of Maine. I was going to volunteer lake, so Lake Stewards of Maine as well. So I think we've been talking about getting a stakeholders meeting again, like we've done in the past, not just for the algicide and the alum treatment, but some of our land use plans and others.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to reiterate what Camille said. That was actually the idea. We identify the basin as an entry point, but we never go
Right.
beyond. And so I'd like to see us do that, especially as we're having the discussions about the suggestions we made to AWD to consider looking at the upper watershed, right? So that makes sense. The timeline, so Marianne asked, when would we expect the deliverables on this, so that way AWD and Lewiston can discuss the alum treatment? Because if we only get this, if we get this by June, that doesn't give them time to get that done, right? I mean,
I updated our board that this was coming to the Watershed Commission, and the reason why we're bringing it to the commission and not them, and the urgency behind why doing it right now, so that we have the results, that we can have the meetings with the stakeholders, ensure our permitting's in place, and, you know, hopefully we don't have to take any action this summer, but if we do, we at least need that plan that's been, you know, stamped and said you need to do this, you know, and again, alum treating is just a Band-Aid. It buys us time to then address what's further up the tree, what's coming down from the tributary. So to me, that's, you know, alum treatments, in my opinion, are never a solution to a problem. They're just we need to mitigate this phosphorus, keep the lake clean, and then we can address further upstream what's going on.
yeah. But
So
AWD and Lewiston, Kevin, you guys are already kind of rocking and rolling on
we've
laying the groundwork, so as soon as you get the information, you could act, you don't have to...
We've talked, and my board understands that once this proposal comes out, there's going to be a recommendation for treatment, that's an operational item that will need an interlocal agreement with Lewiston to execute and apply treatment. So that's what we've discussed, you know, and we haven't sat down and started talking about the agreement or how that'll look, but that's been brought up on our end.
I was trying to look through my notes. I think Ken was planning on a quicker turnaround for this because of the season and being able to treat. So I don't have the exact, I don't want to say a month, but it's like he was planning a quick turnaround. And I think he was also thinking we could act. This was dated end of February or end of March. So it's going to be tight either way. But I think if a couple of the discussions that we've had internally has been with him is trying to understand what Chris is seeing from the lab and the results, and what Erica's seeing in the watershed efforts to say, should we just plan on doing a lake treatment? Because we don't want to do, I mean, we've been kind of waiting for a shoe to drop this winter and see if we had an algae issue, taste and odor issue due to algae with the ice on, based on what we were seeing for turbidity numbers and phosphorus numbers. We're all concerned, but we don't want to, rush into something. We want it to be effective. We want it to be effective use of time and resources. So I can check with Ken and see, but I think it's a quick turnaround, because if we're gonna dose, we wanna do it in May or June, mid or end of May or June, not get into August like last time, July and August. But as we see numbers coming out with some more sampling, we're gonna try to act on it quicker if possible.
Okay. And so that leads me to my last question, which is, I can understand why we would be asked to review this. I'm assuming you're asking us to review this because we're being asked to pay for this. Yeah. That seemed pretty.
That was an easy one.
That was easy. I mean, I guess it didn't explicitly get said, but. So then my final question is, this is our report. My assumption would be that this doesn't get released and doesn't get used by Lucent and AWD until we've reviewed it and said yes. So what does that do for the timeline? Because we just don't meet very often. I guess that's where I'm kind of thinking, like, okay, it's probably good that we're taking this on. Would have been better if we had taken this on, made this decision before. I can understand why we're making it now, but what does that look like? Because if we're taking it on, then it really is, we become responsible for kind of signing off on it at the end before it gets used, right? So
We'll bring it back to you guys for input as soon as we receive it.
yeah.
And then depending on the timing of the impetus, I mean, if we're seeing numbers and different types of algae, and Dr. Wagner's like, this isn't good, you're gonna need to do treatment, that's the conversation we're having with him to be able to understand and bring that back and say, maybe it doesn't work for our June meeting, right? Because we're meeting April and I think it's June. So
Yeah, I'm assuming we're gonna have.
if that doesn't work, then we'd request another specialty meeting to be
Yeah.
able to discuss it, vet it, and be able to
Right.
proceed.
Yep.
What kind of notice are the property owners giving to people who may be coming onto their land to look at the watershed and do that kind of work?
Well, I think like Erica said, some of this may be street side or based on the land parcels that we currently have. But we would be notifying property owners if we went on property. So, yep.
The other question that I asked was if we did dosing stations, is that equipment readily available? Knowing that, I know we looked at the lakes, I think you've looked at both contractors, that materials would be available for us to act quickly, because, supply chain stuff is such an issue.
The dosing stations are actually pretty simplistic.
Probably have in-house talent.
We could probably, if he just gave us the direction on, the dose and the location, we could probably pool and get this put in relatively quick. And I think that's where it's just having his science-based authorization to, this is where you need to put it, and this is the dose you need to apply. These dosing stations wouldn't be just something that's sitting there running, applying alum all the time. They would actually be triggered and activated by flow, meaning that it's a rain event, you're getting that heavy thunderstorm that, the dosing station triggers on, applies, so when you get those high doses in the rain events, you mitigate the phosphorus. So
Are
it's,
these onshore in water stations?
I will know more when the study completes, but the discussions we've had with them would be, that this would be in the tributary, either at the mouth of the outlet or potentially further up. We've mentioned the culvert at the tot lot, potentially. It could be there. It could be at the mouth of the lake, depending on what he finds and the numbers. We're going to have to wait to see. But it's not going to be a huge thing. It probably would encompass the space right here in between us. Could be something that'd be in a roll-off container that would just be set off, stabilized, and we'd have to supply, power and communication, and away it goes.
Okay. I asked as I'm thinking, depending on where he thinks these ought to be put, I mean, if it's something that's somehow anchored to the shore, then Is that gonna
Yeah.
require?
Oh, no, this would be
permission
something,
and Easement? and
No,
access easements and-
again, we're gonna have to wait to see what he recommends, but, you know, you could put the dosing station here and get permissions and run the tubing, 500 feet that way and put your dosing over there. We'd have to look at where we have for sites and where we have available parking to put this thing, and
Right.
gonna have to make it work.
How do you keep, once it's out there, people from disturbing it?
I guess that's all in how you install it and keep it locked up and secured, and that, I mean, certainly that'll be something. He has dosing stations like this. Kevin and I have talked about, let's go look at it. If we get closer to this and they do that, I'd be more than happy to, we'll hop in the truck and we'll go see this thing. We get a better idea of how, what it looks like and how we're gonna take care of it, but,
These are fairly large, they're,
Wachusett, yeah.
reservoirs,
Yeah.
and we're talking, he's got some big flows, but we would scale down for us. But we're talking about possibly a shipping container initially, just to get it out there, be able to lock it up. We can put security on it, tie it into SCADA, all of those type of things, so. We do have flow meters out there now that nobody's really tampering with, that are in a culvert, so as far as the actual, it would be tubing with an injector nozzle, either above spraying down or right in the water line, so. We're not talking about a barge or anything floating in the lake, we're not talking about anything, on stilts in a wetland or anything, we're talking about on land, and that tubing can be run to where the flow is.
And last time it was in the water, right? It was a
Yes,
barge.
that was a barge
That
in the
was a
lake.
barge. I remember that, because it was the full.
I meant to bring some pictures, but I think there's some already on the website of that.
Yeah.
So they had these big booms that came out with injectors and sprayed either on top of water or below water, so depending on the application that they're using.
So my guess is we would fund it from the land fund.
You
Perfect.
probably have the best.
You have the best.
Only money.
I-
Do I hear a motion? Do I hear a motion that you'd like
I
us
think
to
you
buy
know
it?
the finances better than anyone.
Are there,
Yeah.
are there any rules around the land fund of what it can be used for?
It's
Yeah.
not general operating. Land acquisition, preservation of the quality of the lake is typically how we've done it since inception. I went to look at the Watershed's website because I was trying to find the minutes that may have included last month's financial report, just to make sure. But I think did you reach out to Tracy?
No. Oh, well, she and I were in touch about auditing, but that was it.
Okay.
I think you said you might let her know, but no, I did not reach out to her.
Okay.
And Mike just prepared the minutes from the last meeting, so.
Yeah, so
Are
this is
the
what-
packets online?
Do you want this?
Not for the
That's
next one.
the 12,
That's just revenue and
that's it.
expenditure.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
As I recall, I
Yeah.
think we're fine, but,
Yeah,
unless
previous meeting's agenda should be on there.
yeah, but it's only revenue expenditure, it's not balance sheet.
Okay.
So, and we just rolled the year, so I think we're fine. So I'd make that motion to fund it from the not to exceed 47,100 funded through the Watershed's sinking fund.
I can second that, but it sounds like it's all us.
Second. I'm just a guy from Buckfield.
That sounds good.
Any discussion?
My only question is,
Any
I
motion?
mean, because I have to get 3 quotes for paper clips in Auburn, so is there any requirement to? Nope, I'm good. Heather says I don't need to, I'm good.
Yeah, they don't have a purchasing policy for the commission.
Cool.
And it could be less if you find that
Is
there's.
that a not to exceed number of time and materials?
So we'll do not to exceed.
That's what I did, that was in the motion.
One thing I want to be sure is that we give Dr. Wagner and the ecological institutes, the amount of time they need to do a proper, report and analysis. So I don't want us to say, you've got to have it done by mid-May if they don't, if it's impossible. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I
So-
think that's probably why Heather didn't put the time.
No, I wasn't talking about the motion, I just meant our other conversation about timeline, that if things deteriorate in the lake, we might have to do something else if they aren't ready with this proposal, that's all.
Absolutely, yep.
So. All right, so any more discussion on the motion? All in favor? All right. That looks like
Thank you.
unanimous. All right, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is watershed boundary delineation update.
Yes, I've got some printouts for you guys. There we go. So I don't expect you to read all of this at the moment. It's just kind of an overview. The first one's 3 pages. Basically, there's 3 different items that we are asking CDM Smith to give us a proposal on. It's 3 different projects, and they're all related to the Grace Lawn gravel pit.
I don't know if Kevin wants
Kevin wants
to. Yeah.
There you go. Give this to Kevin.
So on the first page, under proposals to consider, the number 1 there, it's just asking CDM Smith to carry out their recommendations that they gave us last fall.
Pick one.
They did a review of the Grace Lawn pit, of the groundwater there, and then they gave us, 2 possible watershed lines through that area, right? One was more conservative, one was less conservative. And on this page, on that figure ES-1, you see the upper blue line and the lower blue line. So basically the area in between there is what they call this area of uncertainty. They said they don't have enough information to say for sure this is or in or out of the watershed, based on some older groundwater studies that we asked them to review, right? So they offered those 2 lines, and at the end of their memo, they said, basically here's some recommendations for extra work that we could do that would allow us to find out for sure, is this area in the watershed or not? So the first part of the proposal that I asked for them to put together is to put together a cost for completing that work. On the second page, it's similar, it's the same figure, but this request is coming from the Maine Drinking Water Program. They went out and looked at the Grace Lawn pit with Kevin and Mike in December, and have communicated back and forth with Kevin and Mike about this. And what they would like to see done is, on the first page, that CDM work. They said, yes, that makes sense, we would like to see that done. And then 2, they added their own orange circle onto this figure, and they want some more information about that area. So they want to know more, they want to confirm the groundwater flow directions in that area. I think that came from what they saw during their site visit, right? They had some question about it and wanted more information. So that's the second piece that I've asked CDM to give us a proposal on, is looking into that area. Looking at the groundwater and just confirming that it really does flow to where those older studies that were done said that it did, because it has been quite some time since that area was looked at. And the last piece here, this is also on the Grace Lawn pit. It's the most southwesterly corner of that parcel, which currently, with every different variation of watershed line that we've seen, has been included in the watershed. However, the owner, John Gendron, or JIG Aggregates, he had a consultant look at this area for current topography, because it has been mined, and their evaluation of it is that the topography has changed such that it's all just draining internally, that it's not going towards the watershed. So they had a current figure with LiDAR and current topographic mapping. They used drones. This was done in 2022. And so the contours for that area, from what they provided us, show it looks like it's all draining internally. So I had asked CDM Smith if they could do a review of that, if they could look at surface water and groundwater, because we also don't have any groundwater information for that site. And CDM's response was, we can look at the topography of it, but we're basically going to do the same thing that John Gendron's consultant just did. I shared their site plan with them. They said we would do those exact steps. We'd look at LiDAR, we'd look at, current contours, and we probably won't come up with anything much different. However, if you want us to look at groundwater, we can, but that's more extensive. So this third part is asking for a proposal and cost for them to do that groundwater work. So this is just kind of a picture outline of what I have asked them to send us a proposal to do. So the idea behind all of this is we want to know, as best to our ability, where does the watershed line actually go through this whole area, right? There's areas of uncertainty. There have been different consulting firms who have looked at it, offered different opinions, but why not just do the work and find out, and then we'll know for sure. Because a lot of the groundwater information is 20 or 30 years old. There's our monitoring wells still out there that we can look at. There may be new ones that need to be placed, like in that area down in the southwestern corner that hasn't been looked at before. And then we'll know, we'll have a good answer. And then also the drinking water program, who are the regulators for the utilities, requested that this work be done. So they ultimately will approve a change in a watershed, the source water protection line, watershed line.
Can I ask a question, Erica?
Yeah.
So they guarantee that they'll have the information they need to determine the proper boundary line.
That's a good question. I
Because
should get that in
certainly,
writing.
so far,
Been a lot of
there's
money,
been
maybe.
there's been no certainty with
Right.
determining that line. So what's going to be different this time for them to be able to say for sure this is the right boundary line?
I think they will gather the information that they need, that they don't currently have, that we
Additional
didn't ask them to do yet previously. We said, can you review this data from before? And they said, sure, but there's missing pieces to that.
They could make conclusions based on that information.
Exactly. This was their best to their ability conclusion. But they did state, we're missing certain pieces of information. So if they get those, yes, they should be able to. But that's a good point. I will ask that, if we have you
Seems
do
like a
this,
logical question to
can
me.
you give us, with pretty strong certainty?
You've got to understand, asking them to make a determination on data that in some cases is 40 years old is difficult,
Mhm.
especially when you've had an active gravel pit
Mhm.
with active blasting.
Right.
Things can change.
Mhm.
That's why this is kind of, drinking water program, that's, they did the site walk, all those little diamonds in there that you see, those represent test wells. Well, we didn't find any test wells when we did the walk.
Right.
So to them, that's kind of like, I don't know where the test wells are, and all this data, if you look at it, some of these studies were 40 plus years. What they want to see is find the test wells. If you can't find them, re-drill them
Mhm.
and recheck the groundwater table and determine whether the water's sloping away from the lake or towards the lake. And then they can, with more certainty, everybody can say, this is where your line needs to be, either here or there,
That was one point that Alex Pugh had made during the walk and then came up in subsequent conversations where one picture of all the monitoring wells on the same date and time, instead of trying to
That's right.
garnish where things going in different timestamps, get a picture that would really settle a lot of the questions.
That's right.
And I think the strength of what we've already done is we know better, what areas do we want these wells in? We could have
Right.
re-drilled these and they're not giving us enough information, so it's kind of good that we waited.
I don't think we should have areas of uncertainty. We need to know, and then it's known and it's our data, and then when the question comes up in the future, we've got it right here, we know.
I guess one question I have is about what's our responsibility for paying for this versus, for instance, that parcel that Gendron has been saying is outside the watershed boundary. Why should we pay to verify what we think is out, in the watershed boundary. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question. We've talked about that a little bit, and that request did come from Gendron's representative, Mike Gatto, to have our consultant look at that parcel. And right, at first thought it is, why would we pay for that? But I think where there are still areas of question here, if we're doing it, then it's on, we kind of hold that information, and if they were to go do it and they were to pay to have it done, then maybe would we end up doing another peer review of it to double check it? And I don't mean that like facetiously, it's just, if we're hiring and paying for the work, the level of confidence in it just might be a bit stronger.
Yeah, I think the only mechanism that I can think of where it would make sense to have Gendron pay would be if he actually produced a plan, and as part of condition of that plan, had that work done, and then we go, we will do it, you reimburse us. But since we know there's gonna be a plan proposed, we just don't know what it is. Since he's not proposing anything specific, it doesn't, if he was proposing something specific, then we could say, well, sorry, but that's not where the boundary is. And then we'd have that leverage to sit down and say, well, if you want us, to look at that boundary for you, that's fine. We're gonna expect you to pay a certain amount, and you'll see that happen, but.
I think he's wrong, you pay for it.
Well, I was just going to say, in the April 12th meeting, we are going to be looking at their specific plan, and it does include that parcel. So that's why I'm, concerned about that meeting with them when we don't, know for sure what's going on.
I think the best thing to do would be to have the proposals on hand, and I don't know what it's going to take to do this. I don't have a feel. Eric and I talked about it earlier. Could it be 20 grand? It might be 100 grand. I don't know if you got to drill. If you got to drill 20 test wells.
Do you think we can have that number by the April meeting from CDM Smith?
I sent this request and I have not heard back yet, but I will find out their timeline. That would be probably quite tight.
Okay.
But I don't see why a week or two even after that meeting we could.
That would be tight to have the proposal.
Yes.
Okay. For even just the proposal.
Well, they're potentially having subs. CDM doesn't have their own,
Okay.
they're not gonna install wells, they have a sub to do that, so I think they're checking with some sub-consultants that they would utilize.
Given what Camille just said, it would be really nice if we had that,
Yeah.
because then if they were here, we
Agreed.
really could say, well, we know how much it would cost, we weren't really planning on doing it, so as far as we're concerned, that's actually still within the watershed, but if you'd like to work with us, we'd love to work with you, delineate the
Right.
boundary, like, how much are you willing to help us out, and that happens all the time, actually.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll find out what CDM's timeline is. I mean, they've done a bunch of work from us, so
Right.
they might be encouraged to.
Where
Get that done.
the goose would go, was
Mhm.
build an egg.
So did you say that Gendron is presenting a plan to us as a commission at our next meeting?
They're going to be
Yeah,
presenting on a
well,
few different things. There's been some requests come in, and we're working on that to
yeah,
figure out how we put them on the agenda.
yeah,
There's been some, I'll have to leave it at that.
yeah, yeah,
But, you know what I mean?
absolutely.
If that wasn't coming before us, I would say, there's no way you can go ask him to.
Well, no. I guess since I know that, and we're now confirming what's going to be on the agenda and things, it may be coming up, so that's why I brought it up. Yeah.
And, I guess this could be discussed after or now.
Mhm.
So the line that we favored, the more conservative line, butts up is essentially against sort of like a right angle. It's not quite a right angle, but it's certainly a geographic, it's an angle, it's not a geographically defined line, boundary. Are we planning on continuing our understanding of where the boundary is for like further, say like onto the college campus property, or are we, saying we were just looking at this because this is a parcel that was in question at some point.
I think from drinking water programs requested, yeah, it's that whole area onto the college or, I can't remember which parcels fall underneath these lines exactly, but I know the college is right there, some of our land is right there, obviously Gendron's land is there. So yeah, not specific just to the pit, but to determine the actual path of the line, no matter which property it was on.
Okay.
If I remember the boundaries correct, up in the northeast corner where the monitoring well 301 is, where the least conservative blue line matches into the existing raspberry red line or whatever. That area, we were looking for wells, that was on pit property. We weren't necessarily into the college property yet, so I think, I don't expect that we would be going onto the college property.
Not with that line, but if we're to be the more conservative line, that line just sort of dead ends, right?
Right.
It's a good question. I mean, that could be put on to CDM Smith to kind of close that gap. What do you need to do to?
And that doesn't need to be emergent for
Right.
right now, but I'm saying if we're here. and we want
Be nice to answer it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if they're installing the wells, then it makes sense for them to try to figure out how this line, as you said, Evan, you know, whatever the final line is, how it connects to what's going on with the college, you know, towards the college. Yeah, because right now, that whole area is uncertain, so.
Other good news is the current pit owner and the city have worked to monitor all the wells that they do know of. So it's likely, you know, at the onset of the study, there might be a lot of data available that, you know, okay, may limit where you need to do drilling or exploring to find wells. So they have been, and they've shared that data. So that's perfect. You know, that may help this be a lot simpler.
Yeah. So do we need to take any action? Do you need anything more from us?
No, this was more of a update for you all, and as soon as I get a proposal back, I will send that out to the board.
Okay. I don't know what 3 is, take action proposals?
Well, that was on the, we've already done that. You took a vote on the,
Okay. All right,
Easy peasy.
I guess we had a very condensed and good meeting in terms of brevity.
I will, we do have a member of the.
Do you want to, yeah, any public comments?
Yes, as it happens, I have some comments on virtually everything you've been talking about.
Okay,
As most of you know who have been on either this board or the boards in Auburn, I'm Steve Beal, and I own a good-sized woodlot that has about 2/3 of a mile of frontage on Townsend Brook, none of which is anywhere near a public road. The nearest public road is Canterbury Lane on the south part of Turner, which Alan may be familiar with. And I have discussed with Erica and Mike doing some sampling in that area. Eric and I were out there with the crew last August. There wasn't enough flow at that time to get a good measurement. And then there was a bit of a paperwork mix-up or something late in the year, and Mike thought that it had been done, but it wasn't. And so I've just spoken to Mike before this meeting, and he has it as a checkmark item to ask the crew when they're doing that kind of sampling to go to that upper area of Townsend Brook. My property line is the Turner Town line, and my property extends to southerly of the power line, which you're all familiar with, where it crosses Route 4. So that's one thing. The other thing in relation to the proposed Wagner study is that there are currently as many as 7 pending land use and zoning ordinances somewhere in the pipeline in the city of Auburn, as Mr. Sears well aware, painfully aware. And one of those proposed ordinance changes is to create a new ordinance prohibiting any new septic systems within a 300-foot boundary of Lake Auburn. And another one is to prohibit any new, the term is animal farms, or new residences in the watershed, just as blank as that. As to the first of those two, these have not yet come forward for any public hearings, but they've been on a future events list before the planning board a couple of times for the last several months and have yet to make it to the formal agenda. When the ordinance prohibiting new septic systems within this 300-foot barrier around the lake comes to the fore, I'm going to propose an amendment to that, which I'll share with you now, which is that constitutes only a half solution to the problem, because it does not include the principal tributaries of the basin or Townsend Brook. I'm going to propose that 300-foot boundary extend up along Townsend Brook and the basin. All of the basin itself is in Auburn, but there's part of the upper area of Little Wilson that's a little bit is in Turner, but the rest is in Auburn. And that 300-foot boundary extend up along those two tributaries. That would include all of my property along the frontage along Townsend Brook, and I think it's important for landowners to be responsible in suggesting remedies to problems that may well include your own property as well as the next guy's. So that's what I'm going to be doing whenever that matter does come before your group, Evan. As to the gravel pit studies, I was not a member of the formal 5-person committee, but I was a member of a slightly larger working group that circulated the successful petitions to repeal that ordinance, which was repealed on September 6th by the Auburn City Council. And just as a little bit of additional background, in case some have forgotten it, the current watershed boundary is back to Grace Lawn Road, but with a little bump out to include the softball field. That's been where the boundary has been reestablished since September 6th. There is currently nothing pending before the Auburn Planning Board or the City Council with respect to the gravel pit as a matter of formal process, although there are rampant rumors every week that there's going to be something here, there's going to be something there. It's forthcoming, get ready. Nothing is presently before either body. So those are my thoughts and comments on these very specific subjects that you've been discussing here this afternoon. I would just simply ask again, Mike, I heard you say that there are presently none of those previous either Woodward and Curran or E.C. Jordan or Summit Engineering wells that can be located?
I said when we did our walk, we did not see any of the wells that we were looking for. And bear in mind, that was in December.
Yeah.
And there was some snow on the ground. We were not able to, we went looking for some wells, and we couldn't find them. So
That's remarkable, I thought.
So, I'm not saying they can't be found.
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
just saying they
just
weren't
like-
found. On one walk, you know.
Yes, I understand. Thank you, Camille.
Sure. And I was ready to adjourn, but this reminded me of something. So we looked at a farm plan that sort of retracted that based on the recommendations we were going to be making to AWD. There was previously a farm plan that was approved. My question to staff is, what kind of oversight do we as an organization have, or does AWD have, in enforcing those plans? And is there any requirement that if the scope and use of the original farm plan changes, that they come back to AWD?
And that's a great question, and I would like to it's high on my list of things to try to figure out for my own, as an Auburn Water District superintendent, I'd like to know the process for this in the future so that it's a little bit more clear, but I believe AWD reserves the right to review and approve those types of plans. You know, we're listed as the entity that, you know, needs to review these as well. You know, we've always vetted that through our, you know, watershed manager and previous staff to do that review, and that's where we've always left it. This board, you know, rejected that proposal, but, you know, I brought it up to AWD, but, you know, we were never asked to look at it. I do know that one that we did review also didn't meet the city's requirements, and they've given them the information they need to get it up to speed, and they haven't done it. So I don't think it's going anywhere.
I ask only, I ask only because I know that there's at least one farm proposal that has been approved within recent years that the scope of the use has changed somewhat from when the plan was submitted. So my question is really, are there rules that would require them to come back and ask for permission to do that? Or once a farm plan's approved, like, hey, you got your farm plan approved for, you know, yeah, for like a dozen chickens, and now you get 30 head of cattle, but, you know, got approved the first time, so, right? So,
Yeah, I think that's a good question, but, you know, as those farm plans are accepted or permitted, it's for exactly what they say they're doing in that plan and nothing else. So, right, if there's change, that's obviously a problem. Do they?
So what kind of enforcement would we be able to do, right? I know that there's a desire to add a use that may actually cause a requirement for impervious surface. So I assume that would have been something that would have been reviewed in the farm plan, right? If that section is within the watershed and so on and so forth. So I bring that up just to ask clarifying questions as to what happens with that, and what sort of process for that, and
Yeah, so
requirements. And so
when
on
they
and so forth.
originally come through, it's usually through the city, as you know, and then
Yeah.
it comes to us, comes to me. So I look at it, work with the city, you know, they need to make sure it meets their guidelines, make sure it meets what we're looking for. But then, right, if something is built or added or is outside of the scope of that, on the enforcement side, first we have to know that it happened, and then of course, that usually goes to the city as for.
Yeah, so it
their
goes to
out-
the city. I'm asking on this side, like I'm aware of what's happening on the city side. I'm just asking, you know, because we have involvement at a certain level at the beginning, is there,
Are we doing
are,
enforcement?
do we end up jumping back in at all?
Well, I
Or is
think
this
it
like
has
a-
happened. I mean, since I've been on this commission, there's been things brought to the attention of the commission that it's like, okay, Erica says, okay, I'm gonna go check on that, right? I mean, with certain landowners, certain horses, things like that.
Mhm.
Like, there's way more horses than there were supposed to be, right? That type of thing, but you're correct in what should that process formally look like versus we just find out about something and send Erica out to double check that.
Right, and I guess
It's
also,
happening.
well, I'm thinking to myself, if we're included in the, well, I guess AWD are the ones that are authorized, but this last time AWG chose to include us. So if we're continue to be included moving forward, or AWD is already included, I guess I'm just wondering if there is any sort of enforcement mechanism, because it seems sort of silly to say, yes, yes, I'm planning on doing this use. I understand that I need to come and ask your permission to make sure that what I'm doing is going to be correct and at least not detrimental to the lake. Then you give me permission, then I go and, again, change from, you know, a hen house to 30 head of cattle or something like that. That's an extreme change, but if there's then no enforcement from the AWD side, it seems sort of.
I think this would really ramp up, like right now, we work pretty well with the city of Auburn recently. Some of the logging activity I'll use just as an example we're going out and inspecting the forestry management that's going on privately owned parcels, and I'm going with city staff. And if we define something that's not okay and they don't take action, then it kind of kicks the ball back to us. Well, they know that's wrong, and knowing it's being done wrong, and they're not going to take enforcement, and then AWD would then have to either authorize through their own entities or through this commission to then say, okay, well, we need to take action. They're not, nobody's enforcing this. But I guess the city kind of holds the lead on enforcement. Erica certainly, we're reviewing a parcel right now that's submitted a, whatever, there's a building proposal. So she's going through, meeting with their staff, going through, she's giving her comments, they're incorporating them, and it's all working great. But if there's an instance where we're saying, hey, we're really concerned about this, and that gets ignored, then that's where I guess we have to step up on our end and say, well, you need to have this done, and issue a letter or whatnot. But I mean, that all happens now. That's the way it kind of functions. But you're right, it would be good to, maybe because I'm new, but I want it in black and white. How does this happen? Who is the one doing this? And just make sure it gets done.
Right, well, I mean, AWD, or if AWD continues to include us and us, we end up in a situation where we've approved a use and can't
Do anything about it.
police the use, right? So that might be something we want to think about for additional recommendations at a later time. If AWD takes up our recommendations to start implementing ordinance, that we also need to think about how they might how we could give them feedback on ways that enforcement could occur. And since we are sort of the enforcement side, that would fall on us, I think.
Are we the enforcement side, or is Auburn Water District the enforcement side?
That's a good question. I think they seem to be the policymakers, and we seem to implement, and we co-jointly enforce, it seems like, depending on what the situation is.
What
So-
state statute say?
Well, state statute, I think the interlocal is probably what is going to govern that one, and then any policies that have been created. So state statute grants AWD the authority to enact policies that carry the weight of ordinance. But then LawPEC was created for the specific purpose of implementing those. And I guess in the interlocal, we have legal right to take legal action against people that are, that are not following the rules that have been laid out for the watershed. So I look at that and I say, well, if we can take action against someone, then that's us being able to enforce. We don't have specific rules on enforcement, but we have been granted authority to enforce, but so is AWD. So again, we end up in a situation where we kind of co-jointly do that, but it's just not clear.
For me, it'd be nice if we're gonna approve a plan, if there's some guidelines around that, because I don't know which is more dangerous to the lake, 10 horses or 10 cows or 10 chickens or 10, so it's like, well, that looks too close. So I rely, when you guys bring it from staff, it's like, okay, that works fine. But I don't know if you're gonna enforce something, how are you measuring what the impact is to the lake and what's the limits you're allowed to have to the lake, or you have to prevent that impact 100%.
This is what I'm talking about. Like, so
That's
moving
where I
forward, that stuff all, you know what I mean? Like,
When I
that
go to
stuff
court,
is
that's what they're gonna ask you.
Gonna start to get hashed out.
Right, what
Particularly
standard did you use?
If AWD starts moving forward to actually, like, exercise its authority,
Which it should.
I think we wouldn't have recommended it to them, I think, if we didn't all think that, right? So if they actually start moving forward and doing that, then, yeah, those are all questions that have to be answered, right? So, so I just bring that up as the farm, but bigger issue, as we move forward, we're gonna have that discussion.
Yeah. I think this gets back to that sort of parcel by parcel source issue as well, not only current, but, in the future. What's the process for evaluating like a new animal, farm, and it gets much larger? Is that now a potential source of problem to the lake?
Right.
I agree, and there needs to be a process in which that's recorded and then what action takes place. And it sounds like it's a little, nebulous at the moment.
So right now, what I had looked at was, what is allowed by the city, but obviously, that's not necessarily a water quality focus, it's not. So if we had our own, the city's kind of funny, it's like 2.5 animal units per acre, or it's something like that, it's like,
Well,
what
it
I'm talking
depends, you
about.
can
Someone
have,
came up with a formula.
you can
Right,
have-
there's a formula for
Right.
it.
you can have 1.5 horses per acre, but
Right.
you can only have 1 pig per acre.
Right.
So riddle me that one.
So, right,
I wanna see the half the horse.
so what I have looked at is that
It's
meeting,
the miniature horse.
city standards, city ordinance. But
Right.
again, that wasn't put together with necessarily, maybe it was a little bit, it's ag and resource protection, I'm not sure, but when that was written, was that with water quality in mind? I don't know.
I don't either.
Probably more the agriculture focus. So if we had another recommendation or wanted to work on something like that, that would make sense.
Next time you get free 20 minutes, can you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, sorry to like open that
Leaving
can of
No,
myself
no.
over.
I'll make
I
a
guess
motion.
if you know of some plan that's been like modified, then someone needs to know about it, so they can.
I will, I
Yeah.
will,
Background horses and
Talk to
sheep.
Mike and Eric. or
well, I'll
me.
include you, the 3 of you
Okay.
guys, and then.
Yeah,
We're going out at night and capturing horses and sheep now.
so, yeah.
40 back. That's what we're gonna do. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So, all right. All in favor?
Yeah, that's.
Heather's gotta go.
I was like, I better say that, so I think of something else.
Heather's gotta go. I was like, she kept on looking at